A blessed day to everyone, especially to Professor Douglas C. Ferrer. Today we were going to discuss about the Revolution and Enlightenment, which with this chapter, it has a somehow correlation with the previous chapters that we've already been tackled, particularly the Renaissance and Reformation. And I am Caitlin Fernando Gutierrez, the first discussant for this chapter. I'm going to discuss the first two sections of this chapter, which are the Scientific Revolution and Enlightenment, and my partner, Miss Bautista, will going to discuss the remaining two sections of this chapter. And this would be the outline of our discussion. So the scientific revolution, the natural philosophy, philosophers and scientists, including the astronomers and the different criticisms that emerged during the scientific revolution, and the breakthroughs in medicine and chemistry, and lastly, the role of women and the scientific method. Scientific revolution gave Europeans a new way to view humankind's place in the universe. One development that helped lead the scientific revolution was the growth of humanism during the Renaissance. Humanist artists and writers spent much of their time studying the natural world, and this interest in the natural world carried forward into the scientific revolution. So, scientific revolution, by definition, was the emergence of modern science during the early modern period when developments in mathematics, physics, astronomy, biology, and chemistry transformed societal views about nature. The scientific revolution began in Europe toward the end of the Renaissance period. It is also important to take note that according to some sources, scientific revolution does not actually mark the birth of science. Instead, the origin of science reached back thousands of years in the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt, meaning to say that there is already science way back then from the ancient civilizations, and even with the Abbasid Islamic Golden Age, science was already give emphasis, most especially with the House of Wisdom, if you know about it. And with this scientific revolution, science itself, at the same time, various fields of natural sciences had become more emphasized and emerged. Moreover, in scientific revolution, it is also important to give emphasis with the terms natural philosophy. So by definition, natural philosophy is the study of nature and the physical universe that was dominant before the development of modern sciences. In simply, natural philosophy is a general term used to describe the practice of studying nature during the ancient times up to the 19th century. Aside from those, in scientific revolution, we can see that it is likely the Reformation. Scientific revolution was actually another break with religious teachings, and we will see that along with our discussion. Way back then, the Catholic Church taught that the earth was the center of the universe. Since the beginning, the sun, moon, and planets traveled around the world. The earth is in perfectly circular orbit, and beyond, there is a realm of divine light pierced through in the form of stars. All this perfect motion was the work of God Himself. And in scientific revolution, understanding of the universe was therefore a challenge to God's eternal perception, as described in the scriptures. But like good Renaissance people, the new astronomers, mathematicians, and their colleges and other fields declared that these old theories needs to be examined. Background to the revolution. So way back then, many Europeans always rely on the teachings of Aristotle and other philosophers in terms of viewing on the world and the things that they surrounded around them. However, by 1400s and 1500s, people or Renaissance humanists' perception of the world were somehow about to change. Renaissance humanists studied the works of Ptolemy, Archimedes, Plato, among others. They learned that some ancient thinkers disagreed with Aristotle and other accepted authorities of the Middle Ages. The Renaissance humanists began to explore with the new ideas of various philosophers or astronomers, and by exploration, it seems like they began to find inaccuracy with those various findings and ideas. At the same time, with various developments, we're also about to discover by different philosophies, astronomers, scientists, inventions such as telescopes, microscopes, and emergence of printing press were begin to discover, and this leads to the changes, most especially with the view on the physical world. A revolution in astronomy. So it started with Claudius Ptolemy. So Claudius Ptolemy, who is an ancient astronomer, geographer, and mathematician. Just like the ideas of Plato, Aristotle, and the Catholic Church, Ptolemy also introduced that the Earth is the center of the universe, which known as the geocentric model. So when we say geocentric, the word geo means Earth. So geocentric model, it stated that the stationary Earth lies in the center and all other celestial objects orbit around it. So in simplest term, when we say geocentric model, Earth is sitting still and everyone is moving around, including the sun, moon, and the planet. So these are some of the example of geocentric model. So as we can see in the presented illustrations that the Earth is actually at the center of the universe. And the sun, the moon, and planets such as Saturn, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, and Mars are revolving around the Earth. And as we observe in the illustration, planets in here geocentric model are not complete, di ba? So as we observe, planets such as Uranus and Neptune are not present with this geocentric model. So according to some sources that I have read, so those planets that I have already aforementioned are not really existing at that time. Additionally, with the geocentric model of Ptolemy, so epicycles were also introduced, which it could be found on the planet, which they also orbited around the specific planet. So as we can see in these illustrations, so these are the epicycles. So based on my understanding, so itong mga epicycles na to, they are something revolving then or rotating din dun sa specific planet. So for instance, itong Mars, di ba? So bukod dun sa nagro-rotate siya around the Earth in the geocentric model, so meron ding mga bilog-bilog which are the epicycles na nagro-rotate din doon sa Mars. Same as with other planets. So those are the epicycles which are also being emphasized in the geocentric model of Ptolemy. So prime mover is also present with geocentric model of Ptolemy. So which prime mover were also present with the model of Aristotle. So in Ptolemy, prime mover is the 10th sphere. It served as the heaven where God and all the saved souls resided. Which in Aristotle, prime mover is also where God resides. And he is the responsible for all the motion and changes in the universe. So that is the prime mover which emphasized also in the geocentric model. And according to some scholars, the geocentric model was widely accepted for 1,600 years. And as already aforementioned a while ago, that Ptolemaic system was adopted by the Christian Church. And because as we know that the Earth is a perfect sphere, created by God and with perfection. And through that, it became the central doctrine of Christianity, and it actually influenced the Europe at that time. However, some claims criticize the geocentric model of Ptolemy. Some astronomers, philosophers, and even scientists stated that this model become complicated and questionable. As according to Nicole Oresme, a philosopher, on his work entitled On the Work of the Book of Heavens and the Earth, he demonstrated that it lacks the real proof that the Earth was static or not in motion. Aside from him, various astronomers had also begun to debunk the geocentric model of Ptolemy. So they are, firstly, we have Nicholas Copernicus, followed by Johann Kepler, and Galileo Galilei, and Isaac Newton. Copernicus and Kepler. So let's first meet Copernicus. So Nicholas Copernicus was a mathematician and a Polish astronomer, and he reinvented the heliocentric theory. And with this, it seems like he challenged Ptolemy and even the Catholic doctrine with his theory. And on his book, which originally entitled De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, or also known as On the Revolutions of Heavenly Spheres, which most of the sources stated that Copernicus published it before his death. So in his book, he gave emphasis with the heliocentric theory, which he placed the sun at the center of the universe, and argued that other celestial objects, including the Earth, move across and revolve around the sun. He also taught that planets orbited the sun and the moon orbited the Earth, and with this, Copernicus also stated that the Earth rotates on its axis once every 24 hours, and the Earth revolves around the sun once every year. So, so as you can see in the illustration, so that is the book of Copernicus and the heliocentric model. So as we look closely with the heliocentric model of Copernicus, we can see that the sun is the center, not the Earth, not just like the geocentric of Ptolemy, which he stated that the Earth is the center and not the sun. So as we can see in this heliocentric model, the sun is once again the center of the universe, and the planets, including the moon and the Earth, are the one who revolve around the universe. Moreover, with the heliocentric of Copernicus, it is really opposite with the geocentric theory of Ptolemy and the Catholic doctrine. It therefore received some criticisms and controversies, mostly with the Catholic Church and even with the Protestants, because with this heliocentric of Copernicus, it is directly challenged the religious philosophy that man was the center of all creation. And based on some readings that I have read, Copernicus had a good relationship with the Catholic Church. And through with this, at first, Copernicus seems like afraid of the criticisms when he published his book on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, and criticisms that he would probably get from some scholars, philosophers, astronomers, and mostly with the Catholic Church. And that's the reason why Copernicus doesn't publish his book as early as he is alive. Instead, he published it before his death in 1543. And as according also to some sources that I have read, when Copernicus saw a copy of his book, he died peacefully. Copernicus died peacefully because he perceived that his heliocentric theory will become useful for the world. Additionally, based on some texts that I have also read, ironically, Copernicus dedicated his book on revolution on heavenly spheres to Pope, specifically Pope Paul III. So once he published it before his death, and by also with that, there uh, there were there wasn't much controversy raised within the Catholic Church, and in fact, Protestants were the first to show heavy opposition. And based on some of my readings, Philip Melanchthon, who is a Protestant theologian, was also contradicted with the heliocentric of Copernicus. And through with this, until 1616, the Catholic Church banned the book of Copernicus, and all those individuals who will continue to support the book and the heliocentric of Copernicus will face charge of heresy. So when we say heresy, it is a adherence to a religious opinion contrary to the church, contrary to the church dogma. And this event seems like similar to what happened to Martin Luther King and his followers way back in the age of Reformation. On the other hand, even though they banned the book of Copernicus, based on some readings, astronomers, philosophers, scientists had already quickly adopted Copernicus' discovery, and one of them is Galileo Galilei, which later on we will find out on what happened to him and with the heliocentric model. And since heliocentric was already adopted by various astronomers and even scientists, there are various modifications or changes occurred during those time with the heliocentric model. And it was not also included in the soft book, but I just want also to add in here briefly about the model of Tycho Brahe. Tycho Brahe, so according to him, all planets orbited around the sun and the moon orbited the earth. So Brahe seems like he combined both geocentric and heliocentric model. And this illustration actually uh, the image of the model presented by Tycho Brahe. So aside from Brahe, so Johannes Kepler, who was a German mathematician, astronomer, and astrologer, and it is also related to Brahe, also made modifications with Copernicus model. So Kepler, using Brahe's database to formulate the laws of planetary motion, which corrects the problem of epicycle in the heliocentric theory by using ellipses instead of circles for orbits of the planets. And this is also the key for mathematical formulation. Because the reason Copernicus' heliocentric model has to use epicycles is due to the fact that he assumed perfectly circular orbits. And with the use of heliocentric model, it eliminates the need for epicycles and difference. So, moreover, Kepler had also developed three planetary motion. But with this chapter, I only give emphasis with the Kepler's first law, which the law of elliptic orbits, which it stated here that the Earth planet moves in an elliptical orbit with the Sun at one focus. So, if we're going to differentiate between Kepler's first law of planetary motion and with the heliocentric of Copernicus, so we can see actually their differences. So in heliocentric, we can see here that the rotating spheres are perfectly circle. But in Kepler, we can see that it is not actually a perfect circle, but rather it is more on elliptical or oval shape, di ba? So in Kepler, sun is still the center of the universe, but hindi talaga siya yung nasa sentro, just like in the heliocentric na talagang sentrong-sentro yung sun. Dito hindi. Pero still it is the center of the universe according to Kepler's first law. So may dalawang focal point kasi siya na parang in-emphasize dito. It is the sun and then ito. So parang tinignan niya along with his mathematical discovery and understanding na kapag gumagalaw daw yung planet and nagre-revolve around the sun, it is not actually circular. Kumbaga parang ano daw siya, parang oval, no? So and I would like to add some important information about Kepler, which I acquired from my previous readings. So Kepler's first astronomical work, which entitled Mysterium Cosmographicum, was according to the sources that I read. So it is first published defense of the Copernican system. And Kepler thought he had revealed God's geometrical plan for the universe. And aside from this, according to some sources, Kepler said and argued that since the Son of God was the center of the Christian faith, the Son ought to be at the center of the universe. And that is in line with the heliocentric of Copernicus. So, in here, dito sa Mysterium Cosmographicum ni Kepler, sinasabi niya lang na parang tama lang daw yung stand ni Nicholas Copernicus na sun yung center of the universe. Besides dun sa mga scientific and mathematical terms na parang ginamit nila in able to much discover that sun is really the center of the universe. So according naman dito kay Johannes Kepler, na sinasabi niya na since dito sa book niya, no, based on my readings, so that I wanted also to share this. So sinasabi niya na since yung Son of God, which is Jesus Christ, is actually the center of Christian faith. So yung Son na S-U-N, so it serve as Jesus, 'di ba? Or the Son of God. So kaya daw siya naging center din ng, kaya kumbaga parang tama lang din daw na maging center ng universe yung sun, because sun na S-U-N is really represents the Son, S-O-N, who is Jesus Christ. And meanwhile, throughout with this modification with the heliocentric model, various astronomers and philosophers have also adopted on what Kepler's done. Moreover, another astronomer who tends to support the heliocentric theory of Copernicus is Galileo Galilei. So another man who's challenged the Catholic Church as well as the Ptolemaic model. Galileo was an Italian astronomer, philosopher, and mathematician. He is also known for having lots of contributions in various fields of sciences. Through with Galileo's mathematical knowledge and technical skills, he was able to build a telescope, which nowadays he was famous for, including also with the lenses. And through with his inventory, which is the telescope, he was regarded as the first person to look at the moon, and through this, he found that the moon was not smooth but mountainous and pitted just like the earth. And through with his telescope also, he discovered the four of the moons cycling in the Jupiter. And he was also able to study the Saturn and discover the pieces of the Venus. And he was also able to understand that the Milky Way was a collection of stars. And he was also able to see and study the sunspot of the sun. Aside from that, he was also able to invent the pendulum, thermometer, and compass. And throughout with those discoveries, Galileo Galilei was regarded as the father of modern science and the first person to discover the telescope. Meanwhile, through Galileo's observation, he strengthened his belief in Copernicus' theory that the Earth and all other planets revolve around the sun. And most of the people in Galileo's time believed that the Earth was the center of the universe and that the sun and planets revolve around it. And in 1610, Galileo published his book entitled Sidereus Nuncius, or also known as the Starry Messenger. And to make Europeans aware of the new view of the universe, then did the work of some astronomers or scientists, including Kepler and Copernicus. So this work, or this book rather, also attracted a lot of criticisms. And with Galileo's conclusion that the sun was the center of the universe, it was not accepted by the Catholic Church, because knowing the fact that the Catholic Church believed that the earth is the center of the universe, and it was actually at the Bible. It says that the Bible is the earth is the center of the universe. And after Galileo began publishing a paper about his discoveries and belief with the heliocentric of Copernicus, he was called to Rome to answer charges brought against him in Inquisition. And in early 1616, Galileo was accused of heretic, just like what happened to Martin Luther in the Age of Reformation. And the church ordered him to abandon new systems, which is the heliocentric, for it is contradicted with the Catholic Church. Besides on acquiring heresy, Galileo continued study of his astronomy, and he became more convicted that all planets revolve around the sun. And according to some of my previous readings, in 1632, Galileo published a book which entitled The Dialogue Concerning Two-Chips World System, which he compared Copernican system with the traditional Ptolemaic system. And by this, Galileo was once called before the Inquisition, and this time he was found guilty of heresy, and Galileo was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1633. His imprisonment was under house arrest because of its age and poor health condition. And by according to some of my readings, by the year 1992, particularly October 31st, the Roman Catholic Church admitted it had been wrong to condemn Galileo Galilei for promoting the Copernican astronomical theory. And way back then, Pope John Paul II officially declared that Galileo was right, and through with that, they accepted the heliocentric model. Meanwhile, Isaac Newton was a mathematician and a physicist, and later became a professor of mathematics, and soon he published his book entitled Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, or simply known as Principia. And from his book, Sir Newton, he defined his three laws of motion, which are better known as law of inertia, acceleration, and reaction. And he even created the universal law of gravitation. And this law of gravitation of Isaac Newton was actually started in a experience of him. So just like the typical story na kunikwento sa atin ng mga teachers natin, especially our science and history teachers, so sinasabi nila na dahil daw dun sa experience ni Sir Isaac Newton na nahulugan siya ng mansanas sa ulo, yun daw yung nag-start, or dun daw nag-start kung bakit niya na-discover yung universal law of gravitation. So, nung nakita ni Sir Isaac Newton na bumagsak yung bunga ng mansanas sa kanyang ulo at tumingin siya sa langit, nakita niya na yung sun and even some other objects found in the sky, like for instance, the moon and even the stars, parang napaisip siya na bakit hindi nahuhulog yung mga nasa sky, unlike doon sa sun, unlike doon sa apple na nahulog sa kanyang ulo. And through with that, he conducted different study. And actually, the Kepler's law and even the study of Galileo Galilei, yun yung parang naging basis ni Sir Isaac Newton in able to accomplish and create this universal law of gravitation. Ayan. So, yun na nga. So, as I already aforementioned a while ago, so in his book, Principia, he defined the three laws of motion at the same time, the universal law of gravitation. So, when he finally conducted, or nung natapos niya ng pag-aralan yung mga theories ni Kepler. So, yun na yung nag-lead nga dun sa universal law of gravitation. And then, yun, na-find na din niya yung answer dun sa kanyang tanong kanina na kung bakit yung mga sun, yung moon, yung planet, yung stars ay hindi nahuhulog sa lupa. And that is because of gravitation. Yun yung sinabi ni Sir Isaac Newton. Parang ganun yung understanding ko toward that. So parang kagaya nung sa kay Kepler, nung nakita niya yung mga planets or nung inaral niya yung mga planets and the universe, nakita niya na kaya pala hindi nagkakahiwa-hiwalay at hindi nahuhulog yung mga planets and other celestial objects na nakikita natin sa universe is due because of the gravity. Moreover, besides on astronomy and physicists, another branch of natural science such as chemistry and biology was also widely viewed in the scientific revolution. And a revolution in medicine had also begun in the 16th century, and it was started with Galen, who is a Greek physician and scholar. So Galen was already mentioned in the previous chapters, specifically in the Abbasid Islamic Caliphate or Islamic Golden Age. And during the time of Galen, it was strictly not allowed to dissect humans for religious reason. Instead of dissecting humans, Galen used animals. And dissection during that time is rampant in able to much study the human body, including health and somehow to formulate medicine. But with this revolution of in terms of medicine, there are also lots of individual who contradicted the view of Galen. The following presented are example of Galen's dissection of animals. Galen's massive contribution to medicine cannot be denied, and according to some of my reading, Galen was the first to identify the psychological differences between veins and arteries. As well as Galen also taught that the two ventricles were perforated and blood flowed throughout it and did not act as a pump. Additionally, Galen also proposed and believed that the spinal cord as well as the extension of the brain, which carried sensation to the limbs. Galen also had a picture of human anatomy, but some of this anatomy of him was wrong in many instances. And through with this, various critics have contradicted to what Galen's presented anatomy, and one of them is none other than Andreas Berzelius. And this is the illustration of Galen's human anatomy. Meanwhile, Andreas Berzelius, who was an anatomy professor at the University of Padua and a physician to Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and unlike Galen, Berzelius dissect not animals but humans. And by 1543, Berzelius published his book entitled De Humani Corpus Fabrica, or simply known as On the Fabric of Human Body. And in here, he fully illustrated anatomy of the human body. Based on observations he made during the dissections and with his book, he also overthrew misconception in anatomy that had persisted for over 1,000 years. And Berzelius also pursued that Galen was wrong. Galen was wrong in some reasons, specifically with Galen's anatomy. Berzelius also found out that the blood vessels came from the heart and not on the liver as Galen had earlier believed. And by this, Berzelius also able to receive various criticisms from other people. So besides on Andreas Berzelius, another English physician who also contradicted to Galen was William Harvey. So William Harvey wanted to prove that Galen thought was incorrect. So William thought that the heart pumped blood around the body. So he is also being the first to correctly describe the phenomenon despite a majority opinion from his contemporaries that disagreed with the challenges to Galen. And in 1678, he published his major work, which entitled De Monte Cordes, or simply known as On the Motion of the Heart and Blood. And with this work of him, he detailed the structure and inner workings of the heart, incorporating, refining, and expanding rather, on many ideas of Galen. So just like Berzelius, William Harvey also viewed that the human anatomy and in terms of blood circulation, so those are some things that uh, William Harvey viewed that Galen is incorrect. On the other hand, science chemistry also arose in the 17th to 18th century. Robert Boyle and Anthony Lavoisier, who were the two individuals who much emphasized in here. So Robert Boyle's contribution to chemistry is his Boyle's law, who is known to be the first law of gas, while Anthony Lavoisier contribution to chemistry is specifically in the periodic table of elements. His contribution is that he was able to discover the elements such as oxygen and hydrogen. As well as another contribution of Anthony Lavoisier is the law of conservation of mass. And through with that, Anthony Lavoisier was regarded as the father of modern chemistry. Moreover, women as well as men also involved in the scientific revolution. And one of the most prominent women in the scientific revolution was Margaret Cavendish. Margaret Cavendish was a philosopher, scientist, and non-fiction writer. She is also known for philosophizing on the natural world and at the same time when the women when denied in any means of education. And throughout the writings of Cavendish, it was widely observed that its topic mainly focused on gender, power, manner, and scientific method. And she was regarded as the first woman to publish her own natural philosophy and the first advocates for women in science. And as according to some sources, she is the first woman to be allowed to attend in a meeting of Royal Society. And on 1616, she published her book entitled Observations Upon Experimental Philosophy, and it brought and encouraged women to get into the sciences. Another woman is Maria Winkelmann, who is a famous astronomer, and her father educated Maria at home. Starting when Maria was a little child, she had an immense interest in astronomy. But since women doesn't have rights to study at the university during her time, she was only educated by her father. And later, when she married Gottfried Kritsch, who was an astronomer, and through with her husband, Maria had much able to learn and study about astronomy. And one of Maria's contribution to astronomy is the discovering of comets. And when the husband of Maria died, Maria applied at the Berlin University as an assistant astronomer. But eventually, she was not accepted to the positions that she is applying for because of her gender. And which during those time, the women doesn't have rights and opportunity to study. So just like the typical story, women way back then should only put at home and not in the field of the academics. So the new conception of the universe brought about by the scientific revolution strongly influenced the Western view of humankind. And it started with René Descartes. René Descartes was a French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist. Descartes did not believe that the information we receive through our senses is necessary and accurate. And it seems like Descartes wanted to address that there is an enough reason in able to know, understand, and even categorize if a certain thing or situation and knowledge is were considered fact or a fiction. And this has somehow had a correlation to the scientific method, which also be discussed later. Descartes wanted also to emphasize that there is a need of huge reason, which observation and evidences are present and able to perceive knowledge. And it seems like speculations is not enough for Descartes. So Descartes also had a most famous statement, which is the cogito ergo sum, or the I think therefore I am. So with this, he proposes that every act of thinking it offers a proof of individual human existence. So si Rene Descartes kasi, he emphasizes with the term reason, and reason is actually also known in rationalism. So pag sinabi kasi nating rationalism, based on my understanding, rationalism does not rely on the experiences. During the scientific revolution, people become concerned about how they could best understand the physical world. And this resulted in the creation of scientific method. So scientific method by definition is a systematic procedure for collecting and analyzing evidences. The scientific method was crucial to the evolution of science in the modern world. In simply, when we say scientific method, it is a body of techniques for investigating phenomena, acquiring new knowledge, or correcting and investigating previous knowledge. And according to some sources that I have read, there are steps in scientific method. And those are, the first one is ask a question. The second one is conduct research. The third one is write hypothesis. The fourth one is experiment. The fifth one is observation, or also known as data collection. And the sixth one is results, or also known as conclusion. And lastly, the last step is communicate results. So Sir Francis Bacon was the one who developed the scientific method. And with this scientific method, he had introduced the inductive reasoning, where it simply states that it always been start to particular to general. So in simply, it always start from specific to broad. So just like the some of the examples or steps that I've already included in the scientific method a while ago, so those are examples of the inductive reasoning. And that ends the scientific revolution. And I hope you learned something with the discussion. And in the next video, we were going to tackle about the Enlightenment. At this juncture, we were now down on the section 2 of this chapter, and the section 2 is entitled Enlightenment. So Enlightenment, it is also called as the Age of Reason. So this period was also a philosophical movement that dominated the world of ideas in Europe in the 18th century. Moreover, with this period, the ideas or claim of René Descartes and Sir Francis Bacon, along with the scientific method, is widely significant during this time. Rationalism and scientific method are the keys in able to find accurate validity to all queries of all the individuals, which include writers, journalists, scientists, philosophers, and so on, during this age of reason. Additionally, the word enlightenment means a time of illumination. So the era was given this name because it is time when influential group of scholars, writers, artists, and scientists actively sought to use the clear light of rational thought to get rid the world of speculations and ignorance. And during this period also, it seems like people are not tired of finding answers and discovering. So that's the reason why, according to some sources, they also used to call the age of reason or the enlightenment as the age of discovery. And as a result of the efforts, tremendous improvements in the understanding of mathematics, science, and other fields also occurred. And it molded new ideas which had a huge contribution in the society through this period. So Through this period also, people in society began to acquire rights and freedom, which in the previous period, specifically when we go back with the scientific revolution, at the same time with the age of reformation, it seems like the rights and freedom are not very well given to the people. And lastly, with this age of enlightenment, so it also served as the mark or emergence of other academic discipline, including social sciences and humanities. As we know today, and all of those were emphasized towards with our discussion. Philosophes and their ideas. In the age of enlightenment, philosophes are wildly present, and these philosophes are otherwise known as Enlightenment thinkers, and they even known as the French philosophers. And these are composed of noble people, including the writers, professors, journalists, economists, and social reformers. And the ultimate goal of the philosophes was to improve the society through the use also with reasons and rational criticisms, which from the start I already mentioned that that rationalism are mainly the focus of the Enlightenment. And the following slides that I'm going to present are the well-known French giants who were also belong to the philosophes. So in the age of Enlightenment. And they are Montesquieu. So wait. So they are these are the three French giants. So firstly, we have Montesquieu. We also have Voltaire and Diderot. And the first French giant that we will going to discuss is Charles Louis de Secondant. So Charles Louis de Secondant, Baron de Montesquieu, or simply known as Montesquieu, was a French lawyer, and he had his famous work entitled The Spirit of Laws. And with his work, he's thinking about what is the best to organize government. And how can we organize government on Enlightenment principles? Montesquieu also give emphasis about the three forms or three kinds of government, which are republic, despotism, and monarchies. So when we say republic, so the people have sovereign power, and it is more on the view of democracy. So meaning to say in republics, so the people have given enough rights and freedom. So that's the reason why democracy is widely present in republic. While in despotism, it is always ruled by a single man without law or regulation, impels everything according to his will. So in simply, so despotism are those who, or we can correlate despotism with tyrants and even dictators, because as we knew, so in despotism the power is only vested to one person, and all the laws are also manipulated by that specific person. And in monarchy, so when we say monarchy, so it is usually ruled by one man. So rules, okay, so it is usually ruled by one man. But by fixed and established laws, so in monarchies, so when we say monarchy, so most of the superior or leaders in monarchies are composed of kings and queens. Montesquieu also conceived the idea of separation of powers or the checks and balances, which serve as the division of government responsibilities into distinct branches to limit only one branch from exercising the core function of another. And these are the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. So when we say legislative branch, So they are the one who makes law. The executive branch are the one who enforces law, and the judicial branch are the one who judges disputes. So additionally, Montesquieu's ideas greatly contributed to United States Constitution. And this American Constitution or United States Constitution was further discussed by Miss Bautista. So the next French giant is Francois-Marie Arouet, or also known as Voltaire. So according to some sources that I have read, he is known as Voltaire because he used it as his pen name. So Francois-Marie Arouet or Voltaire, he was a French philosopher, author, and a playwright. So he write different kinds of book, and he is best known for writing Candide. And according to some of my readings, this book of him is the most accessible books he wrote. It is very short and it is very entertaining. And aside from that, Voltaire also had his famous work which entitled Treatise on Toleration. And as according to some of my readings, this Treatise on Toleration was published in 1763 and introduced new ideas surrounding religious tolerance and social reform that were highly significant with during the Enlightenment and after. And also, as according to some of my readings, Voltaire inspired to write about the treatise on toleration after the Toulouse merchant Jean Canlas was falsely accused of murdering his son and executed in will or on a will in 1762. And Canlas had been persecuted by arms irrational mob for being a Protestant. And through this, Voltaire began a campaign to vindicate him and his family through his work. And additionally, as Voltaire believed in liberty and religion tolerance like John Locke, so this also led him to to write the treatise on toleration. Another French giant is Denis Diderot. So Denis Diderot was a French author and editor, and he is best known for the editor of the Encyclopedia. And according to some of my readings, the Encyclopedia or Universal Dictionary of Arts and Sciences was a collaborative effort to compile and distribute a wide variety of knowledge from an enlightened perspective. At the same time, according to my previous readings, so this Encyclopedia of Denis Diderot was published for over 4,250 copies. And unlike nowadays, we can easily access various encyclopedia through over mobile phones and gadgets with the use of internet. But during the times of Diderot, his encyclopedia was controlled by the Catholic Church and even the government in France. So this work of Diderot was banned because, as according to my readings, this encyclopedia was a perspective which is not accountable to the Catholic Church and even to the state. It just became accountable for some people. And also, based on my previous readings, the Catholic Church put the Encyclopedia of Diderot on what they called index prohibited books. And additionally, as according also to some sources, Diderot was also a poet, and most of the poetry of Diderot was much of fun. So next is toward a new social science. So throughout the different claims proposed by philosophers, at the same time with the influence of natural law, which propose start with Newton, another field of knowledge and academic were about to arose. which are the social science or humanities that we have known nowadays. Which with the social science, it it merely focus on with the study of the growth of particularly economics and political science are rootly begun with the end of enlightenment. And soon, other forms of social science will also follows and began to arise. So, as we go back in my introduction kanina dun sa enlightenment, I already mentioned there that this enlightenment is not only limited on the, it's not only focused on rationalism, but also with this enlightenment, we can also see the emergence of social science, di ba? So as we go back in the scientific revolution, so it's more on it's merely focused on it's merely focused on natural sciences, 'di ba? So in here naman in the enlightenment, the emergence of social science naman is yung nag-emerge. So these social sciences really had a big role enable for us human to much better understand the different concepts in society. So, economics. So, the Age of Enlightenment also had a profound effect on economy. Adam Smith, who was a Scottish physiocrat, and he was widely cited as the father of modern economics. So, these physiocrats that we see on this PowerPoint presentation are the people who wanted to advocate for the free market. So, ideas of free market, or also known as laissez-faire, was emphasized by Adam Smith. And with this, it doesn't limit people to what they want to do in terms of economic aspects or activities. At the same time, it also limits the authority of the government with the economic activities. So Smith only give government the three basic rules, which are protecting society from invasion, defending citizens from injustice, and keeping up certain public works. And the concept of free market or laissez-faire is far different from the concept of command economy. So moreover, Adam Smith also famous from his book which is entitled The Wealth of Nation. So Smith with this book, Smith only focused on the workings of market economics and defeated principles of society. So Beccaria and Justice. So according to some of my readings, in the 18th century, every European nation had a judicial system and a set of courts. So the punishment handed down by these courts were often brutal, involving maiming and public execution. So the reason for those harsh penalties or punishment was to deter future criminals, as the police were not adequately equipped to investigate crimes. So, meanwhile, Cesar Beccaria, who proposed a new approach to justice in his 1754 book entitled On Crimes and Punishment, he argued that public executions did not prevent future crimes. Instead, it only displays of brutality, and in simply it made people more comfortable with the capital punishment that is widely practiced at that time. And at the same time, with the book of Beccaria, he presented and advocate the use of punishment as a form of imprisonment rather than the execution or the use of capital punishment. So the later Enlightenment. By the late 1760s, a new generation of philosophes had come to maturity, and the most famous was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a French philosopher and a writer. He had notable works such as Discourse on Origins of the Inequality of Mankind, which he argued with this work of him to protect property and that the government take away people's right in exchange for the safety. Additionally, Rousseau also had social contract, which also being tackled by John Locke. The idea that the government is created by the people to meet certain end. Meanwhile, another works of Jean-Jacques Rousseau is the Emile, or also known as On the Education of the Natural Man. And in some sources, Emile is also known as On the Education. He wrote this Emile to show a child on how a child should be educated. This is in line with Rousseau's belief that emotion as well as reason are necessary for the development of humankind. Moreover, according to some of my readings, Rousseau's personal attitude paint him as something of hypocrite. He sent his own children off to be resided in the orphanages. And moreover, Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that women were fundamentally different than men, less accustomed to thought or work. So in Rousseau's personal view, women should be educated only in obedience and nurturing so that they could be supportive wives and mothers. Nothing more than required of them. So that is the perception of Rousseau to the women. And those are some of the books of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So now let's proceed to the rights of women. So during in the Age of Enlightenment, women also began to express their ideas about improving their condition in society and in all other forms. And one of that is Mary Wollstonecraft. So Mary Wollstonecraft was an English writer and a passionate advocate of educational and societal equality for women. And on her book, which entitled A Vindication of the Rights of Women, she identified two flaws in enlightenment thinking. And those are people who argued that women most obey men, as well as the government based on the arbitrary power. So she also emphasized that women should also have supremacy of reason, and therefore women must always had a right which are equally to the man. So the next one is the salon. So the French word salon refers to a parlor or living room. So a main gathering space in a private room. And in the 18th century, the salon became gathering places for intellectual conversations among writers, scientists, and philosophers. So they meet weekly to discuss important discoveries and new works. And according to some of the sources that I have read, so in the salon, the hosts were mostly the women, while the guests were mainly men. And those who participates in the salon came from mostly from the middle class, as well as with the aristocrats. And through with these gatherings, it truly helped the spread of the ideas of the Enlightenment. And that is the um, image of a salon. So siguro yung iba sa inyo iniisip na yung salon that time is yung salon, yung typical na salon na alam natin ngayon, which is yung nagpapakulay tayo ng buhok, yung nagpapagupit, nagpapaganda. Well, actually it is not. When we say salon at that time, it is a gathering place wherein most of the aristocrats are the guests, and specifically male aristocrats. They are gathering in that specific place and able to discuss all the things na discover and nag-exist during that time in the age of enlightenment. And as I have already mentioned that mostly the hosts in the salon are the women. And one of the most prominent hosts in the salon during that time in the age of enlightenment was Madame Marie-Therese de Giaffrin. So he was known to be the salon holder or serve as the host, and she referred as one of the leading female figures in the Enlightenment. So religion in the Enlightenment. So although many philosophes attacked the Catholic Church, most Europeans in the 18th century were still Christians. Many people also sought a deeper personal devotion to God. So Catholic Church and Protestants are still wildly present religion in this era. However, according to some readings, the spiritual fervor of the early Protestant Reformation had disparted in the 18th century. It was replaced by state-controlled churches, and that often lacked enthusiasm. So this leads to the parishioners seeking spiritual depth in the new movements. And the most influential of these new movements was Methodism, which was founded by John Wesley. So John Wesley was an Anglican minister in England. Wesley received a mystical revelation and spent the rest of his life preaching his glad tidings of salvation to the poor. So this Methodist of Wesley focused on good works and cooperation. So Methodism stresses hard work and spiritual contentment, which are said to be more valuable than social or political entity. The Methodist Church therefore proved that spiritual satisfaction was still important in the world that emphasized reason. And that is enlightenment. As we go back and as we reflect, enlightenment had a variety of contributions to our lives nowadays. Without those thinkers, philosophers, scientists, writers, and to name a few, we won't probably had this kind of life and society that we are living nowadays. And with the help of enlightenment, we were able to gain freedom, democracy, and even know the concepts and role of government. At the same time, with enlightenment, we're about to learn various knowledge, not only in natural science, but even with the social science, which it could also serve as the key in able to much understand our society nowadays. And that is the overall discussion with this chapter, specifically sections 1 and 2. I hope you learned something, and the remaining 2 sections of this chapter will be discussed by Ms. Bautista. Once again, thank you for listening. God bless and keep safe.
So, good day everyone. Our topic for today is just a continuation of Ms. Gutierrez's report, which is under Chapter 7, The Revolution and Enlightenment. So, the outline of the chapter is under Section 1, The Scientific Revolution, Section 2, The Enlightenment, Section 3, The Impact of Enlightenment, Section 4, Colonial Empires and the American Revolution, then the last, The Birth of Nation. So Enlightenment beliefs were reflected in art, music, and literature of the time. So the first impact of Enlightenment was the arts. The impact of the Enlightenment was not limited to philosophy and science. ideas changed how artists approach to their work as well. So, while traditional forms persisted in some fields such as portraiture, in 18th century saw the development of new techniques in arts such as painting and architecture. So, architecture and art. Louis XVI, by name Louis the Great, King of Monarch in France, built immense residence. These places exhibit Renaissance styles such as Baroque. So when we say Baroque, this is style use contrast, movement, exuberant detail, deep color, and grandeur. So the combination of Renaissance and Baroque created a new style, which means new neoclassical. So when we say neoclassical, this style features religious and secular themes, bright colors, and extreme orientation. Then next is Balthasar Neumann. So one of the greatest architects of the 18th century was Neumann. Neumann's two masterpieces are the Church of the 14 Saints in southern Germany and the residence, the Palace of Prince Bishop of Würzburg. So, these two buildings, secular and spiritual, become one of the lavish and fanciful ornament. So, as we can see, light, bright colors, and elaborate details to greet visitors. So, inside this church, a pilgrim in search of holiness is struck and incredible richness in details. Then next is Rococo. So, the Baroque and neoclassical styles had dominated in 17th century. Art continued into 18th century. By the 1730s, however, a new artistic style known as Rococo had dominated all over Europe. So when we say Rococo, this style featured graceful curves and soft colors to suggest a happy and bright mood. Then the next is Jean-Antoine Watteau. So Jean-Antoine Watteau was painted aristocrat enjoying pastoral entertainment. There is a sadness suggesting the short-lived nature of pleasure. So one of his masterpieces is the Gentlemen and Ladies in Elegant Dress. So, in his painting, Gentlemen and Ladies in Elegant Dress reveal a world of upper-class pleasure and joy. So, underneath that exterior, however, is an element of sadness, as the artist suggests fragility and passing nature of pleasure, love, and life. Then next is Giovanni Battista Tiepolo. So, painted scenes full of enchantment and enthusiasm, unlike the ceiling of President of Würzburg. So, one of the painting of Tiepolo is Bishop Palace. So, many of Tiepolo's painting come to adorn walls and ceiling of churches and palace. So, his masterpiece is the Bishop Palace at Würzburg. So, a massive scene representing the four countries, which is the Europe, America, and Africa. Then now, let's move to the next impact of Enlightenment, which is music. So, in the 18th century was the greatest period in the history of European music. So, in the first half of the history, two composers, Johann Sebastian Bach and George Frederick Handel, stand out as a music geniuses. So, the first one is Johann Sebastian Bach. So, he was the music director at the Church of St. Thomas in Leipzig. He composed his Mass in B minor. So, Mass in B minor was the one of the most profound spiritual testament ever composed. It is the summation of the lifetime creating music. So, unlike majority of his music, which was written for church services. Bach wrote his Mass in B minor to leave a musical legacy. So the next one is George Friedrich Handel. So George Friedrich Handel is a German who spent much of his career in England. He is probably best known for his religious music, Handel Messiah. So Handel Messiah have been called as a rare work that appeals immediately to everyone and yet is a masterpiece of the highest order. Then the next impact of enlightenment is literature. So literature, the novel was especially attracted to a growing number of middle-class readers. So that's the reason why Henry Fielding best known work as The History of Tom Jones, a foundling which described the adventures of a young scoundrel. In a number of hilarious episodes, Fielding presents scenes of English life from the slums of London to the country houses of the English aristocracy. His characters reflect real types in 18th century English society. So, Henry Fielding is an Englishman who wrote novels about people without morals who succeed through trickery and intellect. Then now, let's move on to Enlightenment and Enlightened Absolutism. So, Enlightenment thought had an effect on political life of European state in 18th century. So, 18th century philosopher intended to reform society in a rational way. They believe in natural rights. So, such natural rights is the enlightened government should guarantee equality before the law, freedom of religious worship, a free press, the right of assembly, the property ownership, and the like. Then next is most philosophers believe that society should govern by enlightened rulers. So such enlightened rulers, they allowed religious toleration, freedom of speech, and of the press, and the right of private property, as well as they nurtured the arts, sciences, and education. So, above all, enlightened rulers obey the laws and enforce them fairly for all subjects. So, for a long time, historians describe the monarchies of 18th century Europe as example of enlightened absolutism. So when we say enlightened absolutism, it is the system rulers try to govern enlightenment principle while maintaining the royal powers. Then next is Prussia, army, and bureaucracy. So, Prussia became a major power in Europe under the leadership of the 18th century King Frederick William I. So, King Frederick William I focused on the bureaucracy, which is he strove to maintain a highly efficient bureaucracy of civil service workers. The supreme values of bureaucracy were obedience, honor, and above all to the king. Then, Frederick the Great was focused and concern was the army. That is why by 1740, Prussia's army was the fourth largest in Europe, even though the nation had only 13th largest population. So, Frederick the Great also focused on acquainted with philosophies, and he made progressive changes to the state, like abolishing the torture, religious persecution, and censorship. So, the two leader is they developed the Prussian state along through the traditional lines, the bureaucracy, and the army. So, ito po yung picture nila. Then next is the Austrian Empire. So by the early 70s, the Austrian Empire had become one of the most influential nations in Europe. So Austrian Empire had become one of the great European states by the beginning of the 18th century. So it was difficult to rule. However, it was a sprawling empire composed of many different nationalities, language, religious, and culture. Then the next one is Empress Maria Theresa. So Empress Maria Theresa, who inherited the throne in 1740, who worked to centralize authority and alleviate the condition of the serf through she did not pursue enlightened reform. So Empress Maria Theresa worked to centralize the Austrian Empire and strengthen the power of the state. Then she was not open to the philosophies calls for reform, but she worked hard to alleviate the condition of the serfs, but she did not pursue the enlightened reform. Then next is Maria Theresa's son, Emperor Joseph II. He believed in the need to sweep away anything standing the path of reason. He reformed programs like he abolished serfdom, eliminated the death penalty, and established the principles of equality for all. Then he enacted religious reforms, including religious toleration. However, those reform programs largely failed, wherein the result of this was the Catholic Church with his religious reform was alienated. Then next is Russia under Catherine the Great. So, Peter the Great's death in 1725, there was a series of 6 weak successors who were all assassinated, removed by their guards. The last of these, Peter III, 1728 to 1762, was succeeded by his German wife. He ruled Russia as Catherine II or Catherine the Great. So, Catherine the Great was an intelligent woman who was familiar with the works of the philosophies and seemed to favor enlightened reform. She invited the French philosopher Denis Diderot to Russia. So, Catherine the Great proved to be worthy successor of Peter the Great. In her policies of territorial expansion, under Catherine rule, Russia expanded to the Black Sea in the southwest, annexed roughly half to the Poland. Then now let's move to War of Austrian Succession. So, War of Austrian Succession, the balance of power in Europe led to a global war in 1740. The War of Austrian Succession was triggered when the Emperor of Austria died and throne passed to his daughter Maria Theresa. So, Frederick the Great or Frederick II of Prussia took advantage of the succession of a woman to the throne of Austria, so by invading Austrian Silesia. So, France then entered the war against Austria, so its traditional enemy. In turn, Maria Theresa made an alliance with Great Britain. So, the War of Austrian Succession fighting took place on 3 areas of the world. Prussia attacked in Silesia, and the France invaded the Netherlands. France captured Madras from the British in India, and the Britain besieged the French fortress at Louisbourg in Canada. Then, ito yung Siege of Louisbourg and Surrender of Madras. So, dito nagkaroon ng Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. So, this treaty guaranteed to return all of occupied territories except Silesia to their original owners. So, Prussia's refusal to return Silesia meant yet another war between Prussia and Austria. Then next is the 7 Years' War. So, the 7 Years' War, the loss of Silesia was something that Maria Theresa could not accept from the moment that Prussia refused to return the territory. The Empress began planning a further war. That's the reason why she rebuilt her army while working diplomatically to separate Prussia from its chief ally France. So, even with new army, the Empress knew that she would not beat the combined forces of Prussia and France. She set about turning the French against the recent allies. Her success in his field has been called diplomatic revolution. So, dito nagkaroon ng new allies which is France abandoned Prussia and allied with Austria. Russia joined the new alliance with France and Austria. In turn, Britain allied with Prussia. So, this diplomatic revolution of 1756 led another world war. The war had three major areas, which is the war in Europe, the war in India, and the war in North America. So, the first one is the war in Europe. So, the war in Europe. The war in Europe, all five of the major powers participated in the European theater of the war. The clash of the two major alliances, the British and the Prussians, against Austrian, Russians, and French. So, Frederick the Great of Prussia, with his superb army and military skills, was able for some time to defeat the Austrian, French, and Russian armies. So, his forces were under attack from three different directions, however, were gradually worn down. Frederick faced disaster until Peter III, a new Russian Tsar who greatly admired Frederick, withdrew Russian troops from the conflict and the Prussian lands that the Russians had occupied. So, the war in Europe ended in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. Invaded territories were returned and Austria recognized Prussia's ownership of Silesia. Then next is the war in India. So, the struggle between Britain and France in the rest of the world has more decisive result. So, the war in India, known as the Great War for Empire, it was fought in India and North America. So, over this course of the war, Britain was victorious. This was not due to the size of or superiority of the British army, which was in fact quite small and inept. Instead, it was the persistence of British forces. This simply outlasted the French. So, the war in India was ended through Treaty of Paris in 1763. So, in the Treaty of Paris, France gave all the claim to India and left the subcontinent to uncontested British control. So, India would be part of the British Empire for 200 years. Then the next is the war in North America. So, the war in North America, the battles in North America were more decisive and on a larger scale. Here, the war was known as the French and Indian War. So, Canada and Louisiana was run by the French government as a vast trading area. Most of them traded with furs, leathers, timbers, and fish. Then, the 13th Atlantic colonies. By contrast, British North America was densely populated. The 13 Atlantic colonies were home to over 1 million British subjects and features heavy industry and agriculture. There were two theaters to the American campaign, one centered of the French fortress at Louisbourg on the Gulf of St. Lawrence. This one fort commanded the river approaches to French Quebec. So, French Quebec was the most prosperous and populated part of the Canada. Then, in Ohio River Valley was the second theater of the war. In the early stage of the war, the larger French army was victorious. So, the French occupied the valley so they could deny the British access to its rich farmland. The French contracted Native American tribes as allies. They prepared the French who were only interested in trade to the British who settled and took over land. Then, William Pitt, the Prime Minister of Britain, decided to make America his primary focus, diverting forces Europe to help. So, he used the superiority of the British Navy to cut the French off from supplies and reinforcement. In 1759, British General James Wolfe defeated the French General Montcalm out of Quebec City of Plains of Abraham. Then, from there, the British drove the French out to Canada, the Great Lakes, and Ohio. Then, the war in North America ended in the Treaty of Paris. Britain received Canada and everything east of the Mississippi, including Florida from the Spain. Spain was given Louisiana in exchange. Then now let's move to the next topic, which is under section 4, colonial empires and the American Revolution. So, colonial empires in Latin America. In the 16th century, Spain and Portugal imposed their rule on the new lands they had conquered. Spain established an enormous colonial empire that included most of South America and part of Central and North America. At the same time, Portugal became the ruler of Brazil. So, within the lands of Central and South America, a new civilization arose which we call Latin America. So, Latin America, these names comes from its principal language, Spanish and Portuguese, both derived from Latin. Then, dito nagkaroon ng Treaty of Tordesillas, which is this agreement between Spain and Portugal aimed at settling conflicts over land newly discovered or explored by Christopher Columbus. Then, when we say mestizos, this is the offspring of Spanish ruler permitted intermarriage between European and Native Americans. Then, when we say mulattoes, this is the offspring of American and Europeans. Then, now, let's move to economic foundations. So, one source of wealth of Portuguese and Spanish come from resource extraction or the removal of natural resources from the land. The most important resource extraction was the mining of gold and silver. The abundant supply of those precious metals exported from Latin American colonies financed Spain's war and stimulated further colonization. So, To maintain a supply of labor, the Spanish continued to make use of encomienda system. So when we say encomienda system, in this system, Spanish landowners forced Native American to pay taxes and provide labor. So in return, the landowners were expected to protect them and ensure they were instructed in the Catholic faith. Then, in Peru, the Spanish used the arrangement known as mita. So, when we say mita, it allowed authorities to drop indigenous labor to work in the silver mine. Then, now, let's move to the state and church. The great distance between Europe and Latin America made it very difficult for Spanish or Portuguese monarchs to control their colonies. That's the reason why, as a result, colonial officials in Latin America took liberties in carrying out imperial policies. From the beginning of their conquest of the Americas, Spanish and Portuguese rulers were determined to Christianize the indigenous people. This policy gave the Catholic Church great influence upon the society and culture of the Americas. That is why Catholic missionaries, especially the Dominicans, Franciscans, and Jesuits, fanned out to different parts of the Spanish. To make their efforts easier, the missionaries brought Native Americans together into village and missions. The Catholic Church also built cathedrals, hospitals, and schools for the population of Latin America. They provide basic education and some economic opportunities. The church established convents where women could become nuns as an alternative to marriage. The basic education of American native students with the Spanish or Portuguese language and grammar while preparing them for a religious education. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, a nun who campaigned to provide education for women. Britain and British North America. The United Kingdom of Great Britain was constitutional monarchy. Parliament had the power to raise taxes, create an army, and make laws. The monarch could appoint government ministries and set foreign policy when the government of England and Scotland were united. So, the term British came to refer from the both English and the Scots. When the last Stuart monarch Queen Anne 1665 to 1714 died, the throne passed to her nearest cousin, wherein George I, an elector of Hanover, was a German who spoke no English. Then, George III, he and his son George III had little idea on how the government worked, so they let the Prime Minister to run the nation. Robert Walpole attempted to follow a course of peace under the influence for the growing mercantile class, which is si William Pitt. So, William Pitt was nominated in 1757. He expanded the empire in the populace of the Americans. Then, the populous, prosperous American colonies was technically run by the British government, but in practice, they exercised a great deal of autonomy. The colonies resented governmental interference. Then now, let's move to American Revolution. So, after the 7 Years' War, British leader wanted to get new revenues from the colonies. So, these revenues would be used to cover war costs, as well as to pay for the expenses of maintaining an army to defend their colonies. Then, in 1765, the Parliament imposed the Stamp Act on the colonies. So, the act required that certain printed materials such as legal documents and newspaper carry a stamp showing that a tax had been paid to Britain. Then, because of the opposition was widespread and often violent, the act was repealed in 1776. The crisis was over, but the cause of the dispute was not resolved. Then next is the war begins. So crisis followed crisis in the 1770s. In 1774, the colonies had become so infuriated with the crown that they organized the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Outspoken members urged colonies to take up arms and organize militias. In April 1775, fighting broke out between colonies and the British Army around Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. That is why the Second Continental Congress was held and formed an army called the Continental Army, with George Washington as a commander-in-chief. After the fighting in Lexington and Concord, more than a year passed before the decision was not made to declare independence from the British Empire. So, on July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress approved a Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson based on the ideas of John Locke. The Declaration of Independence declared the colony to be free and independent state, absolved from all the alliance to the British Crown. Then now, let's move on to the last topic, the birth of nation. At the close of the war, the 13th colony was free. However, they had come to distrust centralized government, so they technically separate from one another. The first governing document of the United States, the Articles of Confederation of 1781, did not provide for a strong central government. It created the office of President of Congress, but the position had no authority. The government could not collect taxes, raise an army, or manage trade between the states. That is why, in 1787, 55 representatives of the 13th state in Philadelphia decided on a new system of government. This meeting became known as Constitutional Convention. Constitution. So, the proposed constitution would set up a federal system in which a central government and the state would not share power. The central government would have the authority to raise taxes, create an army, control interstate commerce, and establish a national currency. Then, merong tatlong branches yung US government. The first one is the executive, second is legislative, and third is the judicial. So, when we say executive, it is the president and his advisor. They enforce the law, veto the legislator, nominate judges, and command the military. Then, the legislative is under the Senate and House of Representatives. So, they make the laws, approve the nomination, and control taxation. Then, the last is the judicial. So, dito naman yung Supreme Court. They decide the constitutionality of laws and enforce the Constitution. So, yan. So, the Constitution had to be approved by each one of the states. In some cases, it was close call but all 13 ratified it by 1788. According to the Constitutional Convention, the Constitution had to be ratified or approved by 9 states before it could take effect. Then the next is Bill of Rights. In order to get the Constitution ratified in all 13 states, the Constitutional Convention had to promise to include a Bill of Rights. 12 amendments were proposed and 10 were approved by the state. So, the Bill of Rights is particularly based on the ideas of 18th century philosophers like Locke and Masticky. Enlightenment thinkers saw the American Revolution as the fulfillment of their intellectual prophecy. So, the first 10 amendments guarantee a number of basic rights. Among them are the right to freedom of speech, religion, petition, press, and assembly. They also guarantee the right to bear arms, protection against reasonable search and seizure, right to trial by jury, due process of law, protection from cruel and unusual punishment, and property rights.